A few months ago, I decided to escape my busy city life. I needed a break. I love nature, so I went camping alone in the Mazamitla forests. It was a peaceful spot. I set up my tent and felt excited. I thought some time in nature would spark inspiration for my work as a freelance graphic designer, but I never expected what would happen next. On my second night, everything was calm at first. I sat by the campfire and listened to the crackling flames. It was nice, but then I heard something. A rustling noise came from outside my tent. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it changed. It sounded like something was circling my camp. My heart started racing. I peeked out but saw nothing, just trees and darkness. I told myself it was my imagination playing tricks. The next day, I decided to go hiking. I wanted to clear my head. When I returned to my campsite, I noticed strange symbols carved into the trees. They looked sharp and deep. I didn't know what they meant. A part of me was curious, but another part felt uneasy. Maybe it was some kind of local art? Still, something felt off about them. I tried to shake it off and enjoy my day, but that feeling lingered. That night, I was back by the fire. It didn't take long for things to get weird again. The flames flickered oddly. I thought I heard whispers coming from the woods. They were faint, but sent chills down my spine. I looked around, desperately hoping to see something familiar. All I saw were shadows that seemed to move differently, as if they had a purpose. I felt uneasy. It reminded me of the scary folk stories I grew up hearing, the kind that kept kids awake at night. Finally, I decided to leave a day early. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The symbols haunted me. I stared at them as I packed up. As I zipped up my tent, I turned around. That's when I saw it, a figure just beyond the trees. It stood still, almost blending into the shadows. I blinked, hoping it was just my eyes playing tricks, but when I looked again, it was gone. I didn't know what to think. As I drove away, I kept looking back at the trees. I swear I could still hear the whispers, like they were calling to me. They stuck in my mind, echoing in the silence of the car. I don't know what happened in those woods. I still can't explain those odd experiences. I thought I could reconnect with nature, but I think it connected with me in ways I didn't want. I never felt more alone, yet I knew something had been there with me that weekend. Some things are better left unexplained. Chapter 2. The next morning. The following morning, I drove straight home, eager to escape the memories of that camping trip. The sun shone brightly, but I couldn't shake the chill that crept in at night. I told myself it was just the cold air in the mountains. As I merged onto the highway, the trees blurred by, but the symbols carved into the bark stayed fresh in my mind. Back in the city, I tried to immerse myself in work. I thought focusing on designs would force the images from my camping trip out of my mind. I opened my laptop, but the cursor blinked at me mockingly. My thoughts kept drifting back to those woods. Days passed, and I found it hard to sleep. Every night, I replayed the sounds I had heard, whispers and rustling. I kept hearing echoes of that rustling outside my tent. It felt like something was still lingering, waiting for me to return. Eventually, I decided to do some research. I visited the library and dug into local legends. Surely there had to be something about the symbols I had seen. After hours of searching, I stumbled upon an old book tucked in the back corner. The pages were yellowed, and the title read, "Ghosts of Mazamitla." I flipped through it, and my heart sank. The book described ancient symbols carved into trees throughout the region, used by a forgotten tribe as warnings. The legends spoke of a guardian spirit meant to protect the land. But the deeper I read, the more unnerved I became. The text hinted at those who disturbed the symbols, invoking the spirit's anger. I felt drawn to the book, but terrified of what I had uncovered. Had I really angered something by camping there? That night, I found myself unable to sleep again. I tossed and turned in my bed, finally rising to pour myself a glass of water. As I stood in the kitchen, I heard a noise outside my window, a faint whisper. I froze, heart racing, straining to hear better. It was barely audible, but there it was again. It was the same sound from the forest, sending chills through me. I tiptoed to the window and peered out, but all I saw was darkness. A chill swept through me, and I slammed the window shut. I told myself I was imagining things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that now was following me. The next day, I returned to the woods. I felt uneasy, but I had to know more. I parked in the same spot and hiked to my old campsite. Anxiety coiled tightly in my stomach as I approached. As I walked among the trees, my eyes searched for the symbols, hoping for answers or maybe even some closure. That's when I stopped dead in my tracks. New symbols had appeared on the nearest tree, more intricate and deeper than before. I reached out and touched one, and it felt warm beneath my fingers.
Suddenly, every hair on my body stood up. My breath caught as I heard the whispers again, louder this time. They surrounded me, echoing from every direction. I turned, panic rising in my chest. I wasn't alone. Someone or something was with me again. Then I saw movement at the edge of my vision. It flickered like a shadow against the sunlight, and my heart sank. I needed to run, but my feet felt glued to the forest floor. I was trapped. Chapter 3: The Unseen. I didn't know what to do. Panic clawed at my insides. The whispers grew louder, twisting into half-formed words I couldn't comprehend. I caught a glimpse of the shadow again, flickering in and out of existence, teasing me within the grove. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. As I struggled to break the paralysis, I felt a sharp tug at my sleeve. I spun around, but no one was there. It was as if the forest itself was alive, reaching out to me, waiting for something. I could hardly breathe. The warm sensation from the tree lingered in my fingertips, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a vice. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the stories from the library. What did I disturb? The book warned about reverence for the symbols and respect for the guardian spirit. Had I unintentionally uprooted something ancient? Had I awakened something that had long lain dormant? With renewed urgency, I forced my legs into action. I took off, darting through the trees, desperately trying to escape the whispers that followed me like ghosts. I didn't look back. The path felt like a maze, twisting and turning as I recalled the familiar trail. The shadows danced around me, lingering just out of sight. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled out into a clearing. The sunlight flooded over me, chasing away the darkness that had clung to my back. I leaned against a tree, desperate for a moment of respite, but the whispers faded, leaving an unsettling silence. I tried to gather my thoughts. That's when I noticed something on the ground. It was a small object, partly buried in the dirt. Curiosity nudged me closer, pushing away the fear. I knelt down and brushed the dirt aside, revealing a medallion. The symbols were etched on its surface, similar to the ones on the trees. My heart raced. What was this doing out here? It was like I had stumbled upon a piece of history, a connection to the past. As I turned it over in my palm, my fingers tingled. I could feel something pulsing beneath the surface. A sense of urgency took hold of me. This was important. Before I could ponder further, I heard the whispers again, louder and closer. They weren't just echoes this time. They felt like voices demanding to be heard. I shoved the medallion into my pocket without thinking and took off again, running faster than before. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the trees. The shadows stood still, watching me. There was no safe haven anymore. The medallion was a clue, but a dangerous one. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring past me like the memories of the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed. What was going to happen next? What had I awakened? I needed answers. But deep down, I feared what those answers might uncover. I had disturbed something. Now it was clear to me, but it felt like I was just getting started. Chapter 4. Disquieting Discoveries. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. Sleep had been elusive, filled with dreams of shadows whispering my name. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up, trying to shake off the dread that hung like a fog. The medallion burned a hole in my pocket, and I needed to understand why. I decided I had to go back to the library. There was something about that medallion that felt significant. Maybe I could find more information about the symbols etched into its surface. The thought of uncovering more of the mystery tugged at my curiosity, but a part of me trembled at what I might discover. As I drove to the library, I kept checking my rearview mirror. I felt like I was being watched, like any moment the shadows from the woods could spill into the city. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. It was silly, but shadows had a way of instilling fear. Once inside the library, I headed straight for the historical section. I sifted through old texts, one after another, getting lost in the stories of local lore. The medallion nagged at my mind, urging me to draw connections. I was sure I had seen the same symbols in the books as on the medallion. That's when I stumbled across a tattered journal in a locked glass case. It was dusty and worn, with a faded title, Tales of the Guardian. My heart raced. I called the librarian over, and, with a worried frown, she finally agreed to let me take a look after I filled out some paperwork. I flipped through the pages. Fragments of stories leaped out at me. Tales of lost souls, spirits protecting the forest, and a medallion of great power. The descriptions paired with drawings mirrored what I had found. Then I gasped. One entry mentioned a test that required respect, a way to communicate with the guardian spirit. If it was offended, it would seek a balance, often through those who found its treasures. I shivered. Had I angered the guardian? Feeling overwhelmed, I tucked the journal under my arm and hurried back to the librarian. I had to check it out. As I stepped to the desk, an elderly man entered the library, his presence drawing my attention. He looked oddly familiar. Then he glanced in my direction. I froze. In that moment, I recognized him from the community. He was an old local historian, often hanging around the library. But there was something about his expression that felt wrong. He seemed to know what I had discovered. I tried to brush it off, but then he stepped forward. "Curious about the past, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Be careful. Some things are better left buried." His warning twisted my stomach into knots. It felt like he could see straight into me, sensing my fear and uncertainty. I nodded, trying to keep my composure, but the unease washed over me like a cold wave. I had been right to worry. The more I uncovered, the deeper I was getting into something I couldn't understand. As I made my way home, the weight of the medallion pressed against my hip like a ticking time bomb. I felt an undeniable urge to crack this mystery open. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was tiptoeing on the edge of a cliff. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, cutting through my thoughts. It was a text from my friend Jane, asking me if I had heard the news. I flicked it open, and the world tilted on its axis. "There's been an accident at the camping site." My heart stopped. What camping site? The shadows loomed again. It seemed I wasn't finished with the woods after all. Chapter 5. Unraveling Threads. I could barely focus on the road as I drove to the camping site.
The adrenaline coursed through my veins, almost drowning out the terror building in my chest. What had happened? Who was involved? My mind raced with questions, but one thought clung tightly. The medallion. Had I unwittingly stirred something supernatural? As I arrived, the air felt charged, heavy with unease. The parking lot was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual laughter and chatter of campers. I parked my car, feeling a sense of foreboding as I stepped out. A cluster of people gathered near the entrance, their faces pale and drawn. I approached cautiously. A park ranger stood at the forefront, explaining the situation. There was a cave-in near the hiking trails. 2 people are missing, and we believe they might be trapped inside. His voice was steady, but serious, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. I felt a chill run down my spine. Those trails led straight into the woods. Had they stumbled upon something they shouldn't have? I opened my mouth to ask, but hesitated. What if this was connected to the medallion and the guardian? The stories I'd read echoed in my mind, warnings whispered through the ages. Suddenly, I spotted Jane pushing her way through the crowd. Relief washed over me, but it quickly faded when I saw her expression. Her eyes were wide, and panic flared when she caught sight of me. "I'm so glad you're here," she exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "I can't believe this is happening." "Do you know who's missing?" I asked, already fearing the answer. It's the Thompsons. They took the kids up there for the weekend." Her voice trembled. "I thought they were just camping, but they decided to explore some caves anyway. They didn't come back." My stomach twisted. I remembered how the children used to play near the edge of the woods during town events, laughter mingling with daydreams, unaware of the dark depths hiding just out of sight. "We need to find them," I said, my resolve hardening. "They could be in real danger." Jane nodded, determination breaking through her fear. "Let's go talk to the ranger." Before we could approach the ranger, a man burst from the trees, shouting for help. His clothes were torn, and he was covered in dirt. "We need to warn everyone! There's something in the cave!" A frigid shiver ran down my spine. The medallion seemed to pulse in my pocket, urging me to remember the stories of the Guardian, how it protected its territory fiercely. What if the Thompsons had unwittingly angered that same Guardian? The murmurs spread through the onlookers. A mix of fear and disbelief hung in the air. I glanced at Jane, my mind racing, but she was staring at the man, eyes wide. "Did you see what it was?" she asked, her voice sharper than before. It was dark. It had these glowing eyes. It watched us," he stammered, breathless. We barely escaped. You can't go up there." This was no longer just a camping accident. The weight of fear settled heavily in my chest. But I felt the medallion's pull. I couldn't ignore it. If something was hiding in that cave, I had to confront it. "We have to go," murmured, steeling myself. Jane looked like she wanted to protest, but there was a fierceness in her eyes. As we started toward the trail, everything inside me screamed to turn back. But the shadows of the woods seemed to thrum with untold secrets. Someone had to face whatever was waiting inside. I just hoped we wouldn't lose ourselves along the way. Then we heard it, a low growl echoing from the depths of the cave, raw and haunting. My heart dropped. Whatever waited within those shadows wasn't just a story anymore. We took a collective breath, ready to step into the unknown. Chapter 6. Into the Darkness. The air grew colder as we moved toward the cave entrance. My heart raced, a drum pounding in my ears. I stole a glance at Jane, her face a mask of determination, but I could see the fear lurking behind her eyes. The cave loomed ahead, its mouth wide and gaping, like a dark secret inviting us in. I felt the medallion's weight against my chest, a reminder of the stories I had so easily dismissed. Those tales hadn't been mere folklore, not anymore. "Are you ready?" I whispered, barely loud enough to be heard over the rustling leaves. Jane nodded, adjusting her flashlight. Yeah, we have to try. As we crossed the threshold, darkness enveloped us. My breath quickened, and the only sound was our footsteps crunching on loose gravel. The beam of Jane's flashlight swept across the damp walls, revealing jagged rocks and shadows that danced like specters. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Suddenly, a chill ran through the air, and the faint sound of whispering filled the cave. I froze, straining to hear. It sounded like soft voices, just beyond the light. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my throat tight. Jane nodded. "It's like someone is down here." "Or something," I replied, my voice wavering as the growl from earlier echoed in my mind. We pressed on, each step heavier than the last. A few moments later, we entered a larger chamber, and my stomach dropped. In the center, a shallow pool of water mirrored the flickering light, casting eerie reflections on the walls. But there was something else. A pile of stones formed a makeshift altar, and I recognized a familiar object, another medallion, similar to the one resting in my pocket. "Look!" Jane pointed, her voice barely above a whisper. We approached cautiously. As we neared the altar, the water began to ripple, though there was no breeze to disturb its surface. The medallion on the altar glinted ominously, catching the light like a warning. Something was drawing me closer. Then a low growl resonated from the darkness behind us, the air thickening with a menacing presence. A figure emerged, a shadow that seemed to stretch and twist, merging with the darkness. Its glowing eyes locked onto us, fierce and unyielding. "Run!" I shouted, fear igniting every muscle in my body. We backed away, but our footing slipped on the stones, sending us stumbling. The growl deepened, vibrating the very ground beneath us. With a surge of adrenaline, we turned to flee, racing through the cave. The darkness was alive, whispering taunts as we ran. A chilling realization struck me. Whatever was lurking in that cave was no guardian. It was something much darker, tied to the medallions and possibly the Thompsons' disappearance. We burst out into the open air, gasping for breath. The sun's light felt like salvation, but the shadows still clung to us. I turned to Jane, anguish written on her face. "They're still in there," she said, her voice heavy with dread. "Maybe we can find another way," I suggested, but doubt seeped into my thoughts. We both knew we could be risking much more than our lives. Whatever we had stumbled into was far from over. As we caught our breath, I felt the medallion shift in my pocket. The urge to return was strong. "We need to figure this out," I said, my voice shaking. But when I looked back at the cave, I realized my fears were coming true. The entrance flickered with shadows, darker and more menacing than before. And I knew a choice loomed ahead: uncover the truth or succumb to the darkness following us. Then I heard it again, a faint whisper calling from the cave, and everything inside me screamed that we weren't done yet, not by a long shot. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Past. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows as we stood paralyzed in front of the cave. I could feel the weight of Jane's gaze, urging me to make a decision. I wanted to turn away, to forget we ever stepped foot in there. But the whispering grew louder, echoing in my mind like a forgotten song, beckoning us back. "We can't just leave," I said, clenching my fists. "What if there are answers in there?" Jane hesitated, her eyes darting between the cave and me. "What if we find only more danger? We barely escaped." "I know," I replied, feeling the adrenaline pulse beneath my skin. "But if the Thompsons if they're lost in there, we can't turn our backs." A shadow flickered near the entrance, a dark whisper passing through the air like a warning. Goosebumps prickled along my arms, but I took a step forward. "You can stay here if you want. I'll go alone." No, Jane's voice was firm. If you go, I go. Together, remember? Together. The weight of that word settled between us, anchoring our resolve. We breathed in deep, the sweetness of fresh air mingling with the stale scent of the cave. I turned the medallion over in my pocket, the metal cold against my palm. It almost felt alive, pulsating with energy. "We're doing this," I said, raising my flashlight again. As we stepped back into the cave, the darkness wrapped around us like an old coat, familiar yet foreboding. The whispering faded to a soft hum, but my heart still raced. I focused on the beam of light, illuminating the rugged walls, picking out the glistening moisture. "Let's head back to the altar," I whispered, more to reassure myself than to suggest a course of action. As we reached the chamber, the air felt charged, almost electric. The pool of water shimmered, and I couldn't help it. I reached for the medallion in my pocket. "Can you feel that?" I asked, moments before the light flickered and dimmed. "Yes," she replied, glancing around, as if she sensed an unseen presence. It's calling to you." I nodded, drawn closer to the altar where the other medallion lay. Something about it tugged at my memory. I felt compelled to reach out, to touch it. Just as my fingers brushed the cool surface, the water in the pool erupted into a tempest, swirling and rising like a living entity. The chamber trembled, and Jane stumbled backward, eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" she shouted over the growing chaos. "I don't know."
I called back, heart racing. The air crackled, and the shadows in the cave seemed to merge and form shapes, indistinct but unmistakably threatening. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the depths of the shadows, echoing with anger and sorrow, cryptic and foreign. "Return what is lost." "What do they mean?" I replied, panic washing over me. I felt the weight of two medallions pulling me in different directions, as if they were at war. One held a promise, the other a curse. Before I could decide, the shadows lunged forward, a massive shape emerging from the darkness, eyes aglow like embers in a fire. My breath caught in my throat. Jane grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "We need to go, now!" I tore my gaze away from the impending threat and pulled her toward the exit. But as we ran, the whispers transformed into a roaring tide, drowning out my thoughts. In the chaos, I caught one last glimpse of the altar, the second medallion glistening eerily, and I knew it held more secrets than I had ever realized. Then a deep growl rumbled through the cave, and the shadows surged forward, closing in around us. I didn't know what awaited us outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something monumental. Behind us, the darkness surged, and I realized with dread that whatever was happening was only just beginning. Chapter 8. The Unseen. We bolted toward the cave entrance, our footsteps echoing in a frenzy against the stone. The growls morphed into a deafening roar, drowning out the sound of my heartbeat. I could barely think as I pulled Jane along, her grip tightening on my arm. "Faster!" I urged, just as a shadow lunged toward us. I caught a glimpse of jagged teeth before we burst through the cave's mouth and into the blinding light. Outside, the forest was eerily still. I spun around, expecting to see that monstrous figure emerge behind us, but the cave entrance loomed silently. The air was heavy with tension. Jane panted beside me, her face pale. Did it follow us? I don't know. I took a step back, scanning the tree line as if it might offer some comfort. "We need to keep moving. The Thompsons." "There!" she shouted, pointing toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the woods. "They could be that way!" Without waiting for me to respond, she sprinted ahead. I hesitated, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I could still feel the call of the medallion, a magnetic pull urging me back, but I couldn't risk losing Jane. We raced down the path, branches snapping beneath our feet. "We should stay quiet," I whispered. though the rush of adrenaline made it hard to think. After a few minutes, we stumbled upon a clearing. The sun filtered through the trees, bathing the ground in dappled light. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we should rest for a minute.
Shook her head. We can't stop. What if it comes after us? I nodded reluctantly, glancing over my shoulder. Okay, let's... That's when I saw it. A shimmer on the ground. I crouched down, brushing away leaves. It was a piece of fabric. Torn, dirty, but unmistakably a part of someone's clothing. Jane, I called, urgency lacing my voice. Look at this. It might belong to the Thompsons. She rushed over, her eyes widening in disbelief. What if they're nearby? Let's keep searching, I said. But even as I said it, a chill crept up my spine. The air felt thicker here. I glanced around, noticing the trees swaying slightly, despite the stillness all around us. Then I heard it, a distant whisper, similar to the murmur we'd heard in the cave. Return what is lost. It echoed through the clearing, sending shivers down my spine. Do you hear that? I asked, my heart racing again. Jane nodded, eyes wide. We have to leave now. As we turned to go back, the atmosphere shifted. The light dimmed, shadows stretching longer along the ground. It was as if the forest was alive, watching us, waiting. I broke into a run, Jane right beside me. But the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. My mind raced. What did they want? Why were we being drawn into this? Then I tripped over a root and fell to the ground. As I pushed myself up, my hand brushed against something hard beneath the leaves. I lifted it, revealing an old, tarnished locket. It felt cold in my palm. Look at this, I cried. But the moment my fingers brushed its surface, a vision flickered through my mind. A family gathered around a fire, laughter echoing. But then it twisted into confusion, fear in their eyes as darkness surrounded them. Give me that, Jane shouted, panic flaring in her voice. I could feel tension rising. Wait, I shouted back, but the ground trembled beneath us. The whispers turned into screams, raw and desperate. Let's go! Jane grabbed my arm, pulling me along as we ran. The weight of the locket felt heavier in my pocket. Outside, the sunlight felt like false security. As we raced away, I could still hear those whispers, their demands echoing in my mind. Whatever was lost would not let us go easily. With each step, I knew that we had to uncover the truth behind the medallions and the Thompsons. But the shadows were still lurking, waiting to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Past. We stumbled along the narrow path, breathless and shaken. The memories of the cave and its growls still clung to me. I glanced at Jane, her face a mask of fear and determination. I knew we needed answers, but everything felt wrong. As we pressed on, I could still sense the locket's cold weight in my pocket. It felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something I couldn't see. Every rustle in the underbrush made my heart leap. What had we stirred up? We rounded a bend and froze. In front of us stood an old, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by towering trees. It looked forgotten, yet somehow alive, as if it had witnessed things no one else should. Ivy crept up the walls, and the paint peeled like brittle skin. "Should we check it out?" Jane asked, her voice a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. I hesitated. What if it's just abandoned? Or what if someone is inside? Her eyes darted to the shadowy windows. My instinct said to run, but curiosity pulled me closer against my better judgment. Let's take a quick look. As we approached, a chill washed over me. The air felt charged, like the moments just before a storm. Jane reached for the door, but it creaked open, as if inviting us in. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and old secrets. Sunlight streamed through cracked windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Our footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. Shadows seemed to curl around us, shifting as we moved. Then, something caught my eye on the wall, a faded photograph in a cracked frame. I stepped closer, and my heart dropped. It was the Thompsons, smiling together, blissfully unaware of what was to come. The children looked just as I remembered them, their laughter frozen in time. "Do you see this?" I called out to Jane. She joined me, staring at the photo in disbelief. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, a loud thump sounded from the darkened corner of the room. We both jumped, adrenaline surging through me. "What was that?" "I don't know," Jane breathed, gripping my arm tightly. Sensing the heaviness in the air, I stepped toward the sound, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a warning. As I neared the corner, I noticed something on the floor, a small, intricately carved box. Just like the medallion, it seemed to hum with energy. I crouched down, fingers trembling as I reached for it. The moment I touched the box, a flood of images cascaded through my mind. Terrifying flashes of the Thompsons' last night together, a dark figure looming in the shadows, and the frantic sounds of their desperate cries. "Stop!" Jane cried out, but I was lost in the vision. I could barely breathe, a sensation of being pulled into that very moment. When I finally yanked my hand away, I gasped for air. "We need to get out of here, now!" "Why? What did you see?" "It's not just the Thompsons," I managed. "There's something, it's connected to the locket. It wants something from us." Jane swayed slightly, fear reflected in her eyes. "What do we do?" Before I could formulate a plan, the cabin door slammed shut. The whispers surrounded us again, rising in pitch as shadows clawed at the
"Walls! Let's find another way out!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. As we scrambled toward the window, the shadows coalesced, revealing glimpses of those we lost. Their faces were twisted in sorrow, eyes pleading, and desperation hung in the air. We had awakened something that had been waiting for far too long. Whatever I had seen was only the beginning. I knew we had to solve this mystery before it consumed us like it had the Thompsons. "Go!" I yelled. We lunged for the window, but just as we reached it, everything darkened. The door rattled violently, as if something wanted to break free. "Help us!" The agonized whisper echoed in my ears like a siren's call. I could sense that the shadows were closing in. We had to escape, and fast. But who were we up against? I had no idea, but I could feel the danger tightening around us. The cabin had become a trap, shadows swirling, pulsing with malevolence. I could hardly breathe as panic clawed at my chest. Whatever I had disturbed was angry and desperate, and the ghostly whispers resonated with an urgency that screamed for release. "Find a way out," I urged, scrambling back toward the door, but it felt as if the shadows were solid, holding it shut, suffocating us in that dim, musty prison. Jane's eyes darted around, desperately searching for an escape. Suddenly, in the corner of my mind, a flicker of inspiration ignited. The box I had touched, the medallions, they had to mean something. They were the key to understanding what had happened. I turned and shoved through the gathering shadows toward the box on the floor, my heart racing. "Open it!" Jane shouted, fear lacing her voice, but I had to find out what it held. I dropped to my knees and fumbled with the small latch. It felt like time was both racing and standing still. My breath caught again as the lid creaked open. Inside lay a collection of items, a small fraying journal, a tattered photograph, and another medallion, its surface inscribed with intricate patterns similar to those that haunted my memory. The journal's cover bore the name Thomas Thompson. It was his diary. "Jane," I called,
urgency flooding my voice. "Help me with this." She was beside me in an instant, panic giving way to curiosity. Together, we opened the weathered book, its pages filled with desperate scribblings and sketches. The last entry chilled me. It described their last night, the whispers in the woods, the anger of the guardian, and the promise of a dark entity lurking near the cave, waiting for something to be returned. "Return what is lost," I murmured, recalling the echo from the shadows. A thought struck me. The locket, the medallions, and the guide's voice from the journal insinuated that something must be sacrificed for the balance to be restored. It felt like a heavy weight pressing down. The Thompsons had taken something. Perhaps their unwitting foray into the cave had involved more than just exploring. They had crossed a line. "We need to face it, Jane," I said, voice trembling but resolute. "But first, we must return these to appease whatever is angry before it takes us too." Jane took a deep breath, seeming to understand. "You're right, but how do we do that?" I glanced from the diary to the medallions, piecing together what was needed. "We need to go back to the cave. It all starts and ends there." The fear in her eyes flickered, but I saw determination ignite as her grip on my arm tightened. "Together," she said firmly, "let's end this." We scrambled to our feet and rushed toward the door, the shadows writhing around us, but we forced our way out, not looking back. Once outside, the air felt clearer, but the oppressive weight of the unseen still hovered close. The path back to the cave loomed ahead, shrouded in evening mist. An unseen force beckoned, almost familiar, yet terrifying. The whispers grew louder, sharper, urging us on. As we re-entered the cave, the darkness enveloped us once more, but this time it felt different, more aware. The air crackled with tension. We moved toward the altar with purpose, the medallion pulsing against my chest, a heartbeat in sync with my own. "Here," I whispered, laying the medallion beside its twin on the altar, and then the journal, carefully balancing it on top. As I placed each item down, I could feel the shadows around us stirring, a restless energy buzzing in the air. Jane held up the locket in front of me. "What about this?" Before I could answer, the cavern trembled, the still pool of water roiling violently. "Return it!" a voice boomed, echoing in the darkness, ancient, primal, and filled with rage. Without hesitation, I reached for the locket and tossed it into the pool, my heart racing as it sank beneath the surface. The water shimmered, and the shadows converged around us, a wall of darkness rising from the depths. Immediately, a cascade of blinding light erupted from the pool, illuminating the cave in an ethereal glow. The shadows writhed and screamed, the energy flooding the space, pinching the reality around us. I glanced at Jane, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Now!" I shouted, grabbing her hand. "We need to run!" Together, we bolted toward the entrance. The roar of shadows grew louder behind us, a cacophony of anguish and fury reverberating as we stumbled into the light, collapsing on the forest floor. We lay panting, the sunlight washing over us like a blanket, the oppressive darkness of the cave receding behind. But the echoes of the past lingered, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. As I caught my breath, a thought struck me, unshakable and haunting. Had it truly ended? Were the Thompsons released? Or had we only managed to shift the shadows temporarily? I glanced back at the cave's entrance, already feeling a tug of uncertainty. I moved. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I admitted as we rose and began to walk away. "But I still feel like something is watching." We walked back to the car, leaving the woods, but I had no assurances. The forest enveloped me with uncertainty, skin prickling. I moved to a new city afterward, desperately trying to forget. But even in my new life, sometimes I catch myself looking over my shoulder, unsure if I've really escaped that untamed wilderness. I haven't returned to that place, but those shadows have not fully released me. Some secrets are best left unexplained, like those whispers, which still haunt the silence where the forest meets the sky.